It's one of the things that differentiates the believer from the unbeliever, that although we look out on the same landscape of time and space, and we share the same biology, the same neurology, everything else, outwardly we're the same, but we see inwardly meanings where they see only time and space. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the extraordinary diversity of creation, and He has placed in creation certain, as it were, inward resonances to which the believer is invited to be sensitive. Some places are pleasing to him, others are displeasing. Some places He has told us are holy. Other places have a holiness that might be acquired through generations of righteous actions or righteous prayers. And it's part of the experience of faith that we have a kind of antenna that enables us to feel at ease in places where there is khair and goodness and blessings, and to feel misgivings in a place which is infested, as it were, by dark forces. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has defined this in terms of that which is sacred. Haram is a sanctuary, and there are three great sanctuaries in Islam: Mecca, Medina, Al-Quds. And immediately we recognize that although they're all holy, the degree of holiness, and more subtly the type of holiness, is different. I had the good fortune of spending the last 10 days of Ramadan in Al-Quds, in Al-Aqsa, and you recognize the holiness, the specialness, the apartness of the place, its proximity to heaven, its anticipation of the next world. But it is a different atmosphere that you breathe there to the air that we breathe in the city of the Holy Prophet or in Makkah al-Mukarramah, and it's difficult to define. It's difficult. Similarly, just as in space there are holier places, in time there are holier times. And again, here the unbeliever detects nothing, but just sees or hears the ticking of the clock, whereas we move through life in a state of, as it were, the rising and falling of the waves of the tide of holiness, which is the reality which underpins the outward form of things. So we're told in a hadith, إِنَّ لِلَّهِ فِي أَيَّامِ دَهْرِكُمْ لَنَفَحَاتٍ أَلَا فَتَعَرَّضُوا لَهَا. Allah has in the days of your time exhalations, so open yourself to them. It does mean exhalations, nafahat, and many of the people in our sapiential or hikmah tradition have a lot to say about what this really means. How does the divine exhale? But it's a very graphic way of explaining that in certain times there is a certain openness that the heart has for dhikrullah and for ibadah and for the service of others. And sometimes we intuit this, but at other times we are told it. So we have a sacred calendar. The days are not equal. And we have in particular the idea of sacred months and sacred times. And we use the same kind of language. So just as Makkah has Al-Masjid Al-Haram, we have Al-Ashhur Al-Hurum, the holy months, the sacrosanct months, the inviolable months. Just as to commit a sin in a holy place is, as it were, to do something that is in the nature of things magnified, to commit a sin in those times that Allah has declared to be sacred is also something graver than it is at any other time of the year. So we have 4 sacred months: ثلاث صر وشهر فرد, ذو القعدة, ذو الحجة, Muharram, and also Rajab, which is Rajab al-Fard, the single holy month which comes later in the year, which also has its own rules, its own possibilities, its own opportunities for inward journeying. The month of Muharram is the one whose name explicitly includes this idea of haram, or being a sanctuary. And it comes at the end of this great series of sacred times, Dhul Qa'dah, when our hearts start to move towards Allah's Masjid Haram, and Dhul Hijjah, when we are either there physically or there with our hearts and participate with the great sacrifice of the Hujjaj and the Eid al-Adha. And then we move on in a very subtle thing, and the problem we human beings with human minds have is that this is to do with the unseen world, with the world of holiness, with things that can't be touched or taught or measured, and it's hard to pin down. You won't find definitions of this really in books of fiqh, anybody's fiqh. It's something that the Wijdan experiences. So what is it for Allah to have designed this holy calendar that's linked to the movements of the moon and the sun and the solar system itself? It's in the nature of the physical world that leads up to this month that is called Muharram, which literally in Arabic means that which is made holy, that which is made sacrosanct. Well, it's a matter of mystery. We can only speculate. As are all of the important things of religion, we find it difficult to say anything meaningful in human language. But still we intuit it. And we do want, despite this mystery, to know what is the precise atmosphere of this time. Does everybody experience it the same way? Probably not. People experience the Haram of Makkah in different ways, although they all register, if they have any spiritual life in them, it's holiness. Holiness is this very, very subtle thing. It's like beauty. Beauty, when it's really there, is seen and experienced differently by different observers. So what is it that we experience in this particular time? And why is it that the divine wisdom, we might ask, has placed this particular time at the beginning of the year? It feels like the end of the year, because it's coming at the end of those 3 months. It feels like it's the end of something, but it's also the beginning of something, because it's the beginning of the new year. It's a kind of pivotal time. And also, what is the significance of these first 10 days, of these nights? And what is the significance of Ashura in particular? And why is this singled out? So we're starting off with a lot of questions. And we've already indicated that probably we're not going to find exact answers, because these are to do with the spirituality of things. We know, however, that in the prophetic tradition, Ashura and the other 10 days are preferential times for fasting. So maybe that gives us a clue. Hadith in Tabarani says, Man sama yawman, whoever fasts a day min al-ashr al-awail of the first 10 days, kana lahu bi kulli yawmin 30 yawma. For every day he fasts, he will have, as it were, 30 days. So the reward of these fasts is magnified 30-fold. So that immediately signifies real sanctity, just as the prayers in the Masjid al-Haram magnified hundreds of times. So also our fast is magnified. And we know that the Holy Prophet used to fast on the day of Ashura in particular. And towards the end of his life he said, وَلَئِنْ بَقِيتُ إِلَى قَابِلٍ لَأَصُومَنَّ التَّاسُعَ. If I am given to live to the next year, I will fast the 9th as well. And he asked, when he came to Medina, what is the significance of this? And he recognizes this. The hadith goes on to say, هَذَا يَوْمٌ أَنْقَذَ اللَّهُ فِيهِ مُوسَى. This is the day on which Allah saved Musa. And this immediately opens up a whole range of other traditions, some of them firmly established, others in the realm of popular history or mythology, but all of them pointing towards the same truth, which is that this is a time of beginnings, not just of the calendar, but of something larger, and a time of endings. And that's the nature of dunya. Everything is cyclical. Like the moon is cyclical, the year is cyclical, human beings are born, they flourish, they die, everything comes and goes, everything moves in circles except for the divine, which doesn't move but is absolute being. So we have, for instance, the idea that Adam's expulsion and or his reconciliation happen on Ashura. We have the story that says that Sayyidina Nuh alayhi salam was saved finally from the flood on Ashura, and so on with many of the Anbiya. This is something that you'll find in the history of Tabari and Muslim histories. This is the idea the Muslims have had of this being a special time where something comes to an end and something new begins, just like the year itself. It goes around in circles. Even in English we say, this new year, many happy returns. We have this idea that things are going around. Maybe we'll return again and greet each other next year. So we have already this idea of the specialness, and the hadith which is narrated in Sahih Muslim, Ashura Yawmun min Ayyamillah. Ashura is one of the days of Allah. Every Muslim recognizes there's something about it, spiritual radiance, radioactivity, power. How we define that, if only we could, if only physicists with all their brilliant equipment could one day produce a meter that could tell us what times and what places are particularly full of barakah, but that meter is the human heart. Science has its limits. Now, if we, as it were, fast forward it and we say this is a day that has been important throughout sacred history in this mysterious way, a time of fasting, and fasting always means repentance, renunciation, moving away from dunya, recognizing the fleeting nature of things, our absolute weakness and dependence on the world, and the need for sabr. And we move it to the story of Islam. We find another register of this, which is that the divine wisdom determined that in the history of the Ummah, some of the most traumatic and heart-wounding events in our history happen at this time. And again, we would really like to know why at this particular time, why Ashura, why this time of Tawbah, why this time when prophets were released. But this is probably beyond us, but we know that there's a deep wisdom there that is going to enrich us and help us to be healed. And we know also that this is something to do with Tawbah, not just somebody's Tawbah maybe long ago, but the Tawbah that we need ourselves. Sacred history is there not just to inform us about stuff that happened in the distant past, but to explain that things move in circles, and therefore Ashura always comes again. And the recollection of past tragedies is always something that's only useful to do if it helps us to move on, and to move on in our own personal journey of sacrifice and tawbah.